Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
I'm doing pretty good for 3.5 years of you tolerating me all this time, but I'm doing good. It's a good day.
Good. What motivated you to join the military?
What motivated me to join the Army?
Yes.
I didn't. I was drafted. Back in that era, you had no choice. About 1.5 years out of high school, you received your notice in the mail. You got a little postcard. It says, you have been selected. And at that time, you can't join any reserve or any other outfit. So then you had like 30 days, I think, you know. And the first day was at Fort Wayne in Detroit, and then Camp Custer in Battle Creek, Camp Chaffee in Arkansas, and Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So that was my first 2 weeks. Boot camp was 2 months long, and that was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma at the artillery base. And it was 24 months of pure, on a job, running. You never walked, you ran everywhere. You got called out 2 o'clock in the morning for a march, or you got an inspection at 4 o'clock in the morning. And if the inspection failed, if someone's bed wasn't right, they tip all the beds over. There were 200 guys per barracks. And so inspections were they would pull surprise inspections. But it taught you a lot, I think. You learn very quickly to react very quickly without questioning anything. And that's the goal of boot camp, that you respond without asking or thinking. You just do what you are asked to do. I met a lot of interesting people. It was really, I was a farm boy in Livonia, Michigan, when it was a farmland back in the 40s. And I met people from New Jersey, New York, California, Nebraska. Even met one cowboy. He was a cowboy out in Arizona. But you met all types of people, and at that time, they were just starting to integrate the black military people with the whites. Before, the whites were by themselves and the blacks were by themselves. And we were one of the first units, and it went well because we all faced the same issues. And it was interesting. It was a learning experience. The military food in the mess halls was quite interesting. The worst food was SOS. Anybody in the military knows what that means. It's a chipped beef over a piece of toast, and it's not good. And some of the better foods, they'd always bake these flat cakes about this thick and about this big. And that was probably the best dessert we ever had. It was like rock, but you had to chip it apart. But it was okay. One of the funniest things that happened when we were in Fort Sill, every morning you had to call off for reveille at 5 o'clock in the morning, was reveille time. And you had to be on time, lined up in front of the barracks. And every morning they did roll call, and they counted all the troops that were available. And this one guy was always late. And one morning, after about 2 weeks of this, he said, I'm going to be on time this morning. I'm going to make reveille on time. And it was, of course, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, it's dark. He ran out there and he ran into a guy wire on his neck. he never did make that roll call that morning, but he was okay, but he tried. Oh, I was in the Army. Now this is interesting now. There's only one group in the whole world like this. It's the United States Army 88th Field Artillery Battery Searchlight. We had the big old searchlights, and we worked with the artillery. We'd go up on the mountains at night and light up targets for them. And there was only one outfit in the whole United States of that.
Wow.
And we also had that 280 atomic cannon in Fort Sill.
Really?
They developed that back in the 50s, and it had a semi-cab on the front and a semi-cab on the back. It drive, set down, and it would fire like 25 miles.
Holy cow.
And when that round went off, they had to fire over the base from the East Range to the West Range, and that went off, the barracks kind of shook. I think the military service affects you in a lot of ways. One way, you are disciplined, and you show respect for everybody and everything because you are a team, and a team has to work together. And it taught you to be on time, and it taught that if you were given a accountability or a job to do, you got there on time or early, and you got it done and done right. And you always followed through and make sure it was done properly. So in that aspect, it really enhanced my life. And I think most people in the military would probably say about the same thing. It's 2 years, but it was a good investment in my life. Yeah. A message for other people, it's hard to tell what their outlook on life is, but on me, it improved me 100%. When I got out of high school, I was going to UD night school, and I was working full-time, and I had various jobs here and there. But the military gave me direction on what I wanted to do the rest of my life. And I was in communications, and I was in communications my whole life. In fact, my working days, I worked for a Dictaphone Corporation. I installed and maintained the 911 systems. And it was good work. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's very cool.
And you got to enjoy your work. Money is secondary. Enjoy what you are doing. Well, I've been retired for 30 years now from Dictaphone. I had 40 years in. And I have been a volunteer fireman for a number of years. I was with the auxiliary police for a number of years, another area. And I do a lot of work with the American Legion. And I keep pretty busy. And I have 4 children, 16 grandchildren, and 18 great-grandchildren. So that keeps you busy. And we have a family. We do, and that's important, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
My name is Jerome Bies, Army Air Corps, veteran of World War II. I was, nothing motivated me. I was drafted, so I had to go. Basic training was in down in Texas. Basic training, which was you had to walk, get acclimated to the Army and their way of things, and that lasted only about 6 weeks. And then after that, I run at the same base. I was transferred into a mechanic school, airplane mechanic school, yeah, on B-25. And strangely enough, I had the training on B-25, but never worked on B-25 after that.
Yeah, so what values did you get from the Army?
Oh. That's another question that, you know, it's so, I really didn't learn anything except that I was drafted and I had to follow orders and obey everybody and just waiting to get back out again. You ate what was available, you know, what they cooked, and it's a marvelous job that what the cooks, or they were just enlisted personnel, like everybody, and they did best they could in cooking meal. Of course, at that time, you know, we were young, so most any food was okay. Well, going over, the war was on yet. And of course, we didn't know where were we going, what we assigned. So on July 7th, I think it was, 1945, we arrived at the island of Iwo Jima. And from there we had to go from that transport ship to a landing craft because there's no pier. My fear there was dropping too soon and falling in between the two ships, getting crunched. But with a little timing and everything, when the bobbing was at the right height, you just let loose and drop down into the landing craft. And then we were taken to our tent. They were already up. And then, of course, we started into our assignment of repairing aircraft. That's what I did. And the first assignment we had was to change an engine on P-47. Yeah. And then it wasn't long that the war ended, you know. So after that, it was just a waiting game for a ship to come and pick us up. And that lasted 4 months. I had to wait 4 months for another ship to pick us up. And of course, the war was still on yet, but the combat was over. Yeah, all those poor soldiers and Marines and Army, and there was a bunch of them that got killed. Yeah.
My father and my uncle, my dad was in the Navy, as was my uncle, who was actually not in the American Navy, but he was in Free French Navy. They were both World War II vets, and I also wanted money for college. And I started with the Florida Army National Guard. A basic training, yes, it was a lot of cleaning and polishing and marching and sweating and learning the Army way. And I was also in one of the last companies going through basic training with the Women's Army Corps. After that, we all got integrated into the Army itself, so there wasn't a separate corps. I suppose my longest time that I was any one place was at Fort Lewis, Washington, but for 4 years. But in that 4 years, I was deployed out either for exercises or school, so I wasn't actually there totally 4 years. I was just assigned there for 4 years. After that, I was many places. And I spent 3 years in Korea at different times. I was in Germany for 3 years. I was in Turkey, and I was deployed, obviously, to various places too. I was most proud of my last rank when I was promoted to Sergeant First Class, which is the equivalent of a Marine gunnery sergeant. I was also a platoon sergeant, which is the same thing. It signifies that who I was in charge of, how many people. And at the time that I was promoted, there were only 100 women in the military police corps at that time, and I felt kind of special. The first person that I remembered and thought of was a gentleman that I met in Germany. His name was Adam. I don't remember his last name, but he was a Polish Jew, and he had been rescued from a concentration camp by the military police, the unit that I was assigned to in Germany. Now this obviously was towards the end of World War II, and he remained with that military police unit even though he was part of what was called the Polish Labor Service. the U.S. government had kind of formed up all of these displaced persons after the war to give them employment and a purpose, because Adam had lost everyone in his family, and he most appreciated the American MPs for bringing him out of a very bad experience. And the other person I remember was, that I attached great significance to, was a young Korean who was what we call a KATUSA. It's an acronym. It means Korean Augmentation to the U.S. Army. And he and I had a lot of conversations about the differences between Korea and the U.S. And he did write to me a few times, but he was, like myself, moving around, and we lost touch. On Thanksgiving Day especially, they would have a special Thanksgiving meal for the soldiers. And we went into the dining facility. We call it the mess hall. Everybody calls it a dining facility now. And you wore your dress uniform, and you had a formal meal. All the fixings and the senior officers and senior enlisted acted as the servers and the waiters and waitresses, which is kind of cool when you're a younger member of the military. So that was the best meal.
Oh, that sounds fun in the military.
Okay, funny story. I had to search for one because I thought sometimes funny stories are not exactly funny to somebody outside the military. But it was when I was deployed to Somalia, and facilities there were a little sparse, and we had a shower trailer which we shared, men, women, so there was hours for the women and hours for the men. Well, I'd gone in to take a shower, and as I'm showering, I heard the door open and somebody passed by, and I happened to look out outside the shower curtain. I saw this very hairy leg go past. And I thought, that's not a woman, that has to be a guy. And so I kind of stuck my head out, and it happened to be my lieutenant. And I reminded him that he was coming into the shower at the wrong hours, and could he please leave? And he was very embarrassed. My initial thing was I was only going in, my plan had been to go in for a short time. And I found that it kind of fit my perspective on life. I liked the fact that I had a purpose. You get to interact with people and you learn about their history, so you got a better perspective. Plus you get an idea of what the world really is, as opposed to reading about it and seeing movies. Yeah, you can read a lot of books, but it doesn't give you the perspective as when you go to a place like I did in Korea, and on Buddha's birthday, which is very important to Koreans and any Buddhists who celebrate Buddha's birthday, which is, by the way, the 5th of May. And I went with a group to a Buddhist temple, and it was at night, so we're walking up all these stairs and going into the temple, and it's all lit by lanterns and candles, and it's just beautiful. You just don't realize what that is like until you experience it for yourself, and you can't do that through a camera lens. You really can't. You can't experience, like when I met Adam in Germany, understanding what he went through and what his life could have been as opposed to what it ended up being because of the war. And the people who were in Germany at the time of the war, they have a different perspective. There's an old saying in the military: freedom, for those who fight for it, has a flavor the protected will never know.
True.
Charles Jeffries, and I was in the Army, the Korean War. Actually, I was a teenager during the tail end of the war, the Second World War. And I kind of got into the military kind of thing and decided I might make a career in the military. And during my last year of high school, I began to contact my congressman, see if I could get an appointment to West Point. Actually, I guess it didn't matter which one of the academies I went to. So that started. I didn't make it that year, so I decided to go to a little school known as North Georgia College, which was and is the military college of Georgia, so that I might be able to get a commission at the end of that, which I did. So I did 4 years, did try one more shot at the academy, was admitted, chose not to go because I already had 2 years of college. And I didn't want to do four more years of undergraduate. So I finished at North Georgia College. Was commissioned second lieutenant infantry, and decided that I really didn't want to face that kind of challenge. And since I had medical experience with the laboratories at TB Sanitarium, I had requested a transfer of branch and was actually commissioned or transferred to the Medical Service Corps. Had two specialties. My primary was laboratory officer. My secondary was battalion surgeon's assistant. Battalion surgeon assistant basically is the administrative officer for the corpsman and the surgeon that's assigned to a battalion. My first assignment was to what was called an indoctrination course, which is, I guess, basic training for professionals, which wasn't anything much, but and nothing that was new to me. But I went through it at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas, and that was about eight weeks. And then went to my first assignment, which was at Fort Hood, which also is in Texas, up north a little bit, and was serving there as a battalion surgeon's assistant. When I got to Japan and into the replacement depot, I got to my primary service specialty, which was a laboratory officer. Well, it was a stepping stone in my career line, which was very valuable to me. And I got my first research paper from work in the laboratory in the Far East. Well, I continued to be a microbiologist, and when I was released from active duty, I immediately went back to school to get my master's and subsequently my doctorate. Well, the war ended. The European War ended in April. Before I graduated, the Pacific War ended, I think it was in August, finally in September really, before anything got started. And I went off to North Georgia then that fall and got started in my career. But the big thing that happened was that the Army built a general hospital in my hometown during the war. And at the end of the war, they just handed that over to the state I don't know what the provisions were in compensation and so on, to move the TB sanitarium from over in northeast Georgia to my hometown, which is in the northwest. And so they had people there to move material around, get beds into the wards and so on, so that they could bring the TB patients over and begin their treatment there. Because they wanted to use the TB sanitarium for a different reason, which I won't go into. But anyway, I worked in the warehouse, moving stuff around, helping some on the grounds. And when September came, I left and went off to school. But I came back and visited the guy that I worked for, because I worked about half that time prepping chemicals and drugs and so on to get the wards properly equipped. So I got a little bit of experience with drugs at that point, but that was the end of my pharmacy activity. Because I don't know why, but I was thinking about the laboratory. And I asked the guy I'd worked for that summer what he thought about my chances of getting in the lab. And he said, well, go up and talk to them and see what they can do. So that summer, I got a job in the laboratory working with TB samples and diagnostic procedures and so on.
Hi, I'm Jim Mangi. I served in the 1969-71 time frame with the U.S. Army in Brooklyn, New York, and in the Republic of Vietnam. I came through ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. So when I graduated from college, I was commissioned as a lieutenant. So our officer basic training, the equivalent of boot camp, was in Fort McClellan, Alabama in July. And some folks are familiar with what Alabama in the summertime is like, but just that part wasn't fun. The training was for a chemical warfare officer. I was commissioned in the Chemical Corps. So we went through a range of training, but the most memorable training exercise in August in Alabama was an exercise of decontaminating equipment after it has been contaminated with things like nerve agent. Now you talk about nerve gas, it's actually a liquid. So what we were doing was rehearsing, practicing how to decontaminate a Jeep or a tank that has been doused in this very, very dangerous material. In those days, back in the 1960s, we didn't have the hazmat suits that one sees today. In the 1960s, these suits were made of rubber. And underneath the rubber suit, we wore long johns in August in Alabama. And they weren't just long johns, they were dipped in paraffin to make them more impervious to this. So we're out there under the summer sun in 3 or 4 layers of completely impermeable clothing. It had to be impermeable, and gas masks and hoods and double, triple gloves and all that. Every blessed one of us lost about 5 or 10 pounds that day. But, you know, that was the kind of thing that we had to practice. it's a blessing that nothing like that was ever really needed. And in fact, very shortly thereafter, President Nixon banned us from even thinking about using that kind of stuff. So I had really good training for something that was never needed. There was my assignment to Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn, New York. Now, if anybody's ever been to New York City, you know there's this famous Verrazano Narrows Bridge. It runs from Brooklyn to Staten Island. The bridge is built at the narrowest part of New York Harbor. That's why you put a bridge there. But that's also why they put a fort there in the 1600s. Fort Hamilton is one of the oldest continuously staffed military establishments on the North American continent. Little tiny place, though. So I go in there and report to the adjutant, "Hi, I'm your new Chemical Corps officer." And the adjutant says, "We don't really need a Chemical Corps officer right now." I said, "All right." And he said, "As long as you're here, why don't you tell me, what you'd like to do here at Fort Hamilton?" I said, "Well, sir, I'd probably need some more information about what the fort does." "Information? Great. We'll make you the public information officer." So I edited the Post newspaper, wrote speeches for the general for 6-8 months, and finally I called the personnel office in the Pentagon. And I said, "Oh, get me out of here." And he said, "Lieutenant, this is your lucky day. We have a slot opening up for a Chemical Corps lieutenant with the 25th Infantry Division." And I said, "Oh, where are they based?" Now, here is a life lesson. If you ask the wrong question, you will get the wrong answer. The answer to the question that I asked, "Where is the 25th Infantry Division based?" that answer was Schofield Barracks, Honolulu, Hawaii. Sign me up. Now, the question that I should have asked, but didn't, was, "Where are they now?" The answer to that question was about 25 miles inside the Cambodian border. So, by the time I joined the 25th Infantry Division, I picked them up right there on the border with Cambodia and Vietnam.
Well, most of all, there's a war going on in Vietnam, and I was 18 years old, and I was going to be a prime candidate to go in the Army, which was against my I did not want to do that, and so I chose the Navy. I went and signed up, went in, and took off 2 weeks later for boot camp over at Great Lakes Naval Training Center. My job was, well, first of all, I went from boot camp to submarine school out in Newland in Connecticut. And that was about 10 or 12 weeks long. And after that was over, I went out to the fleet. And I went aboard a submarine Squadron 1, Hawaii. And it was a missile boat squadron. There were 8 submarines in that squadron. 4 of them had missiles, the rest of them were fast attack submarines. Our boat was built in 1959. It was commissioned in 59. I went aboard it in 1959, and I was the first enlisted man to go aboard the boat, other than, you know, the crew that put it in commission. It was terrible. We had the lousiest bunch of people you ever saw. Our boss was a chief petty officer who had made chief in one 4-year hitch. He was a brilliant man. But our guys from Chicago, New York. They were just unmilitary. They were fit, apparently. They made it through boot camp. And when we were leaving, the boss said that this is the most unmilitary group I've ever seen or heard of. If you know anything about missile boats, they spend a lot of time in deep water. Cold water on the Pacific, not so cold on the Atlantic. I was on the Pacific course in Hawaii. Most of our operations were in the North Pacific, up around the Bering Sea, Hawaii, outer Mongolia. It was crummy duty. 90 days out, 180 days in, 90 days out, 180 days in. That got pretty monotonous. Well, it taught me to be very patient. It's so close in there, you know, you're elbow to elbow. You have to deal with people you might not like, you know, and you just have to deal with it. And that carries over for me. I to this day am more patient than I ever was as a kid, you know, a youth when I went in. I'm sure glad I did it. At the time, I was very hesitant to go. My parents didn't want me to go. My girlfriend didn't want me to go. Well, she didn't try to really stop me or anything, but she wasn't, she didn't want to see me leave. I went. Glad I did. I had all good experiences. I met some wonderful people. Submariners are a tight organization. Like I ask you, how many submariners do you know? You don't know any. So they're a rare group. And the ones that are tight-knit. They're very tight-knit. They stick together. I got friends I made in the Navy I'll never make in civilian life. I went to electrician school, and I got out of the Navy as the E5 electrician. And that was pretty much about it for the early days in the first year. There was a lot happening. There was a lot going on. That was a Cold War. If you might recall the Cold War between the United States and Russia. And it was don't grab my property and I won't grab yours. But they watched very closely what we did, and we watched very closely what they did. I crossed out funny and I put experience because we didn't have too many funny experiences. It was some very serious, top secret duty. And there's a lot of those things that went on that I was reluctant to put in, you know, and tell you about it. And certainly some of the events that happened that are memorable weren't funny at all. Like one time we were up halfway between north latitudes of Alaska, not into the Bering Sea yet, and we were under the water, and we hit an iceberg underneath. Not an iceberg, I always call it an ice floe. It's a big chunk of ice that busted off an iceberg, you know, and it's been floating around looking for a submarine to run into. And it was hectic. I'm not kidding you. You hit something when you're under the water. It gets your attention right away. I mean, it really rocked us because we were going at a pretty good clip. On top of the boat, there was a launcher, and of course, we had to be on the surface to launch. These were Regulus missiles, and the iceberg busted a part of the launcher, so we were out of business. I met the Shah of Iran, believe it or not. He and his entourage came aboard the Growler, and they, these guys are all decked out in white uniforms and gold braid and medals all over the place. And after they had lunch up in officers' country, they came in a group through the boat. And I was on watching the engine room, and the Shaw, I can't remember his name, but it's something like Rouhani. He stopped and he looked and asked a few questions, but as far as other like celebrities and things like that, you see them, they're on the pier, but they don't get anywhere near the boat or get in it. They don't really have a need to. I was 18 when I went in, and I got out 4 years later. And I was married to my girlfriend. We had a baby a year old. The same girlfriend that I left, and I was lucky enough that somebody didn't grab her while I was gone.
Do you have anything else to add?
You know, I really don't, but I'd like to say if anybody is interested in what we did, there's a book written about the Growler and all of the submarines in Submarine Squadron 1. It's called Blind Man's Bluff. Blind Man's Bluff, the untold story of American submarine espionage, which we were doing. We were spying, they were spying. But that's what we do and did. I'm sure I got I'm glad I got a chance to come in here and talk.
Yeah, one